On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, Trump goes WWE on the IMO over the NZF. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So, holy cow, we have got a fight going on in London. This is the maritime fight of the century right now over the net zero framework that the International Maritime Organization is trying to pass. If you would have asked me back on Monday or early in the week, would this pass? 100% it was going to pass. There was no question that the net zero framework was going to pass. Now we're looking at it maybe not passing. And I can't tell you what a huge shakeup this is. Now, if you're a follower of this channel, you know we've been talking about this. Back in September, we talked about the U.S. was declaring war on the IMO regarding this net zero framework. This deals with greenhouse gas emissions. And understand, it's not that we're talking about anti-environmental here. What we're talking about is the framework being put in place by the International Maritime Organization over global shipping and what that entails. We're going to break this all down for you so that you can better understand it. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you learn about new videos as they come out. So here's a story by Paul Morgan over at G Captain. This was on October 14th. Global shipping faces decisive moment at the IMO's MEPC ES2. I mean, good God, the acronyms here are going to drive you crazy. So what are we talking about? Marine Environmental Protection Committee. So that is the committee. It's hosted by Secretary General Arsenio Dominguez from Panama. He's the president of IMO. He's highlighting the critical need to lock in mandatory rules through the IMO Net-Zero Framework, which is scheduled to wrap up on October 17th. 4-day gathering is set to approve changes to MARPOL. This is the Marine Pollution Act, Annex 6, that's turning the ambitions of the 2023 IMO Greenhouse Gas Strategy, GHG strategy, into concrete obligations, given that maritime transport contributes almost 3% to worldwide greenhouse gas emissions, which reportedly equates to, wait for it, 0.00012% of global CO2 in the atmosphere. This event marks a turning point in greening an industry valued at $14 trillion. So what are we talking about here? Back in 2020, the proposal was put forth by the IMO to begin a phase down in greenhouse gas emissions from shipping. We had to shift over to very low sulfur fuel in 2020. We had the introduction of measurements in 2023, CII, and a whole other system of measurements to measure pollutants. But one of the goals here is to get us down. And one of the objectives set forth here is by 2040 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by ships by 40% based on 2008 numbers. Now, I have to tell you that we are up over 2008 limits right now in terms of shipping. A lot of this has to do with the spike in shipping that happened here recently, has a lot to do with the Houthis sending ships around Africa and the longer sailing routes. I want to understand this system even better. I recommend you come over here to the IMO's website. They have an entire FAQ on the net zero framework, what it does, talks about the global fuel standard that requires ships to gradually reduce how polluting the ship's fuel can be done. It talks about a pricing mechanism, how this takes into effect. This is where they're going through the process right now at the MEPC 83 meeting. What types of ships are covered? Everything over 5,000 gross tons. That's all shipping. That's responsible for 85% of global shipping. Talks about how ship emissions are measured and what exactly does the IMO net zero framework work. And basically what it is a carbon tax. If you emit too much carbon, you're going to be penalized. And if you emit less carbon, you can get remedial units, a bonus basically, and you can sell them. And then it established what's called the IMO Net Zero Fund. Now, this fund will receive, manage, and disperse collected revenue from the pricing contributors. It'll reward low-emission ships. It'll support innovation, research, infrastructure, and just transition initiatives. It will fund training, technology transfer, and capacity building to support the strategy and mitigate negative impacts on vulnerable states. Now, I have to say, that is the thing that gets everybody a little crazy. This is, in the interpretation of many, a tax on shipping, and that tax will go into a pool managed by the UN, the International Maritime Organization, and then it's going to be allocated as they see fit. Some people say, hang on, there's no protections in there for this being a slush fund. There's also concern that the United States will cut off funding to the UN, and the UN needs some other way to generate revenue to keep it up and running, and that this method may be used from it. Again, there's a lot of talk about what this entails. All right, so that was the plan. Coming into Monday, everybody thought this was going to happen because there was no appetite for it not to happen. And then this story hits on Monday. IMO postponing NZF, or NZF for my British folks, vote as climate talks near a crisis point. Plan to put the IMO Net-Zero Framework on ice, floated as political divisions deepen. Greece, Malta, and Cyprus are ready to abstain if the IMO vote goes ahead. Now, the EU votes as a bloc, but three nations there and three substantial shipping nations, Greece, Malta, and Cyprus, are threatening to abstain. And I will not go into the voting process here because the voting process in the IMO is very complicated. It deals with nation states. It's not just seafaring states, but then you have to measure in other factors like percentage of fleet, and it gets really, really, really ridiculously complicated. Goes on, if a vote is forced, the U.S. threats of reprisals could derail adoption. The U.S. was threatening states that voted for this to put reprisals in against them. So according to the story from Lloyd's, that there is a proposal to put the NZF into abeyance is being considered. That would basically hold off on the vote. Sustained pressure from the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and UAE and other oil-producing countries. I have to say, yes, these are oil-producing countries that are opposing this. However, I do think there's other issues at play here. It's not just because everybody wants to burn diesel fuel and keep that going. There is concerns about the fuels that are being adopted. For example, ammonia. I'm heading off to a conference in Australia. I'm going to listen to an entire talk on ammonia fuel. I am a skeptic of ammonia as a fuel. I'm not denying that you can't use it as a fuel. I have a question about the safety factor on board ships and whether in the long term ammonia can be a sustainable fuel. Anyway, while representatives from each of the states have declined to comment in advance of any vote, sources with knowledge of the matter confirm that the EU vote would likely not be unanimous. That would be unprecedented within IMO meetings. Lloyd's List understands the proposal to put NZF into abeyance, effectively a procedural pause with no time limit, comes from senior figures within the IMO Secretariat. Closed-door negotiations among member states on Thursday evening will decide whether the plan is put forward on Friday. This would probably be tabled by a member state rather than the Secretariat, with China a likely candidate with sufficient political influence to get the plan agreed to. Now, I got to say, China is a huge opponent of NZF. They love this. They want to see this done, which may make you wonder, wait a minute, why is China so greenhouse gas, kind of important? On shipping, they're different. Why is that? Because they're the largest shipbuilder in the world. If you build this ship today in 2025, you'll get a service life out of that ship of 20 years. If all of a sudden in 2040, your ship has to be 40% less carbon emissions, and it's not, you got to get yourself a new ship, or you got to repair it, or you got to get a modification. And guess what? China's the guy in town to do that. And so for China, this is a huge boondoggle. They want to see this pass. Now, I should also mention the shipping firms want to see this pass. Just at the Virginia Maritime Association, where I listened to the spokesman from the World Shipping Council get up there and say, we need this passed because we need the fuel companies to know that this is the mandate, and therefore you have to set up global bunkering systems for ammonia, for liquefied natural gas, for methanol. Because if this is not mandated, they're not going to set up those fueling areas around the world. And that means ships that are being built to consume those fuels will not be able to operate at all. And understand, this could potentially create avenues where certain shipping lines will have monopolies because they have fuel and other companies don't. So if you set up a green corridor between Shanghai and Los Angeles, and you control all the liquefied natural gas on each end, or you control the ammonia or the methanol or the ethanol or whatever type of fuel you're going to use, you can monopolize that route and put yourself in a very advantageous position. And this is one of the concerns that's out there. Also, if you're a shipping company, you've got to sit there and say, hang on a second, I'm investing all this money in these brand new ships, and come 2040, they may be obsolete. How about giving me a carve out in these new rules and regulations that allow me to keep these older ships until we can phase them out for new ones down the road. Let them run a normal service life and we'll get new ones. This is the entire issue that's at play. It is not just the US, Saudi Arabia, and UAE sitting there going, we love oil and we want to ship it out. It's a factor in there, don't get me wrong. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we got to where we are today, because it was a wild week watching this. So this is Declan Bush over at Lloyd's. IMO should adopt, then fix the net zero framework. There's a lot of dislike about the NZF, but the industry has much to gain from its adoption and no ready alternative if it fails. This was the kind of the consensus here. Everybody assumed that this was kind of it. You know, hey, it's not perfect. It's not great. Even the Secretary General came out and said that. Hey, this is not great. It's not perfect, but it's the best we have. Let's go ahead and pass this and we can fix it later. Well, it seems like that's may not happen here. Then this hits. This is October 14th. The Wall Street Journal has an opinion piece. The United Nations is about to tax you. A new global climate tax would be the ultimate in taxation without representation. Okay, that is the argument going out. And again, it does create it. Now, understand, this is a tax on shipping. This is a tax on international shipping operating, and it will be enforced by the flag states who are part of the MARPOL Convention, which, by the way, the United States is. So if you are a signator to the MARPOL Convention, this is the Marine Pollution Act, you would be forced under Annex 6 to enforce this. And therefore, this is why you have member states making the argument that we don't want to see this done. And the U.S. is in the midst of its shipbuilding, try to rekindle it up and going. And, putting these restrictions on could be a problem. Now, I have argued in my past video just the other day that this is an opportunity for the United States too. If we can come up with a net zero fuel, I'm thinking small modular nuclear reactors, then we could be in a very advantageous place. Then on the 15th, we had this story also from Declan Bush. The U.S. tries to hobble NZF with late bid to change acceptance rules. Change from tacit to explicit acceptance would make NZF easier to block. Supporters argue tacit acceptance has been used for over 50 years. Opponents stress divisions over carbon price regulations. So those cracks began to appear at MEPC, and what we're seeing now is other states joining in. If you wonder what this looks like, here you go. And with the subcaption there, China voted in favor of the NZF on Tuesday, but appeared to favor explicit acceptance on Wednesday. So you're asking, what does that mean? Tacit acceptance, the system the IMO has used since 1973, means a MARPOL amendment enters into force 10 months after it's formally adopted by the MEPC, unless 1/3 of the parties to MARPOL or countries representing 50% of the world's gross tonnage object. Changing to explicit acceptance would mean 2/3 of contracting governments would need to write to the IMO to confirm their acceptance after the adoption on Friday. Now, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia argued that the slower process was more appropriate because of the danger of, the degree of division that's going on in the IMO. The U.S. called explicit acceptance a simple way to forestall these concerns. In other words, every government has to write to the IMO to confirm their adoption. A number of countries on the plenary floor in London on Wednesday urged the MEPC to keep tacit acceptance, led by Denmark, Canada, Australia, the EU states, and Kenya. Meanwhile, Brazil and India sat there and said explicit acceptance sometimes simply does not work. The World Shipping Council, which I mentioned before, needs this passed so that they can get the fueling agreements in place, said, quote, adoption through explicit ratification of the current amendments does invite delay and prolonged uncertainty that might be measured in years or decades. Also means that we're not going to see those fueling systems set up. The chair of the MEPC, Harry Conway of Liberia, said the majority favored keeping the current rules. He referred the matter to a drafting committee for further work. I will say that Liberia, Panama, Marshall Islands are really key in this, because if this system remains, if it sits up there and it's under the tacit acceptance, that means you have to get it in unless 1/3 of the parties to MARPOL or countries representing 50% of the world's fleet object. Well, Liberia, Marshall Islands, and Panama represent 45% of the world's fleet. Now, I don't think Panama is going to go. Arsenio Dominguez, the president of the IMO, is from Panama. And really the galvanizer here was this one on October 16th. Outraged, Trump tells nation to vote no on shipping carbon tax at IMO. The U.S. has a substantial vote in this, not because it has a large shipping fleet. It doesn't, as we all know. I've talked about this for a long time. There is no big fleet out there. However, as being the largest importer in the world and consumer of shipping, it does have a say. So President Trump will have a role in this. And it's interesting to note that he, withdrew the U.S. delegation from the IMO earlier this year, but they're back there now and they're on the floor, which is something I argued about, is they really need to be there to be taking part in this. Tomorrow is, or today would be when I release this video, Friday will be the day where we will know what happens regarding the net zero framework. If it passes, it'll be a squeaker of a pass. It's going to be very close. I foresee either a very close passage, they'll have the votes locked up and they'll go ahead and vote on it, or they're going to put this in abeyance and they're going to hold off and let the dust settle, work on it behind the scenes, and then call it back in. If it fails, it fails. They can't bring it back up again. And that would actually cause a lot of chaos across shipping, because what that means is a lot of ships out there and about ready to be built may not have guaranteed fuel out there. And what this does do, without a doubt, is cause more uncertainty in shipping, which raises cost across the board. It's just exactly what we want to hear as consumers. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You can hit the super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. Got to give a big shout out to my buddy John Conrad over at G Captain. He has been talking about this forever. And John is really the person who I think behind the scenes knew this was going to become. But John is really a understander of what's going on with global shipping. Till our next episode, this is Sal, signing off.